talked about Ford's hot passenger cars in part 1 of the Rally Sport story, and if you haven't seen that, there's a link above. When we left off, Ford of Europe were riding high. The top 3 cars sold in the UK were the Escort, Sierra and Fiesta. The Sierra RS Cosworth and RS 500 were the cars to own, but there were dark clouds on the RS horizon. What happened to the RS brand in the 90s and beyond, and did those cars live up to those amazing cars from the 70s and 80s? I wouldn't have been able to tell this story without the help of Steve Harper, one of the designers of the Escort RS Cosworth, and most importantly, Steve Saxty, author of all these books behind me, detailing the storied history of Ford from the early 1970s to the 2000s. He's got special RS versions of these books, and you can get 20% off right now with promotional code BIGCAR20. There's a link above and in the description. It's all here in part 2 of the Ford Rally Sport story.
The new Ford Sierra, a dynamic driver's car.
The initial troubled but ultimately successful Sierra was reaching the end of its life, but there would be another small facelift in 1990. The RS Sierras of the 1980s had helped turn the Sierra image around in the public's mind, so an RS update was timed for the 1990 refresh, the Ford Sierra RS Cosworth 4x4. As the name would suggest, the standout feature was four-wheel drive, something that would help its quest to compete in rallying and add a high-tech Audi Quattro-like feature to the road car. The car looked the part on the road and had all the luxuries drivers were coming to expect with RS cars, but in competition it was a disappointment due to its size. Over in South Africa, apartheid restrictions made it hard to import new engines, so Ford of South Africa used locally produced Essex V6 engines to create their own RS, the Sierra 3-litre IRS. But RS may not have meant Rally Sport, with adverts using Rennsport, the German word for motorsports. Ford's big push in 1990 was the brand new 5th generation Escort. The original goal was to create 2 hot versions, the 1.8-litre XR3i and the 2-litre XR Plus. But with the RS badge being so coveted, the XR Plus became the RS 2000, available in both front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and it harkened back to the legendary car from the 1970s. Thanks to the Mark V putting on a few pounds, despite a more powerful engine, it had similar performance to the old 1.6-litre Escort RS Turbo. But despite this, it was still outclassed by the 9-year-old Mark II Golf GTI. An all-wheel drive version would arrive in 1992, which gave the car more traction, but on asphalt, the extra weight meant less acceleration. On the rally circuit, the Sierra was proving too heavy, despite having a superior engine to the 1987 World Championship winner, the Lancia Delta. What if Ford's motorsport team could package the Sierra parts into something smaller? This was 1988, the new 5th generation Escort was yet to be launched, but already customer clinics were showing that the reception wasn't going to go down well. A new rally-winning Escort would give the new car some pizzazz. The crazy idea of making a Sierra look like an Escort took hold, and with the help of MGA Developments they fitted larger Sierra mechanicals within an Escort-based body. The project got the codename Feral for a domestic cat gone wild. Steve Harper was given the job of styling this unique Escort, but those Sierra roots were soon getting in the way.
One of the big problems we had on the early cars was that the engine was too far forward. And the first cars, the first ones I designed, I had to have a huge bump on the front end of the hood. And so we got them to move the engine back. And as soon as they started to do that, we really left the Sierra floor pan a long way behind, because it really then became a new hybrid of an Escort and a Sierra. So yeah, there was not much left of the Sierra by the time I finished with it.
To give the car enough downforce, a large whale tail rear spoiler was added to the rear. There are rumours that it was a 3-piece spoiler, but those are just rumours, and everyone that worked on the car confirms that it was always intended to have just a 2-wing spoiler, and that spoiler was for more than just looks.
This is the first production car ever to have downforce. It was 0 lift in the standard form and 40 kilos downforce in the extended spoiler form.
Soon a mock-up was ready for wind tunnel testing.
Carman built a lash-up body, which we then attached all the aero aids we made in foam and clay. We took over to Cologne, put into the wind tunnel, and these big old propellers wound the speed up to 100 mile an hour. And there was this almighty bang, clatter. And I'm just kind of looking up thinking, oh God, all those, John Brady's parts that he'd made. I thought all those parts had ended up, back in the fans and broken one of the fans because they'd come off. But actually it was the hood had come open at 100 mile an hour. Carman had supplied the car, but they hadn't put a hood latch on it. They'd only put a little hook. And of course, at 100 mile an hour, the hood just lifted off and hit the windscreen. We'd only got 2 days to do all the tests. And there was the car with a smashed windscreen and a roof which peaked. And luckily, Dieter Hahn and the motorsport guys were on hand. And his guys came in and they panel beated the car to shape within a couple of hours and put an rolled aluminium windscreen. So the first pictures of the car have a glass windscreen. The second picture of the car has got an aluminium windscreen.
That swift action to save the wind tunnel test had paid dividends, and the styling team had the data they needed to produce a well-balanced car. And styling-wise, it was a beauty. But did it go as fast as it looked? Thankfully, much progress had been made in that department. The first prototype, based on the previous generation Escort, could outperform a rally spec Sierra Cosworth, which was a good sign. Ford was warming to this rally contender, but who should produce the road-going version? There was a natural partner, Carman. They'd produced the North American version of the Sierra, the Mercure XR4Ti in the 80s, and still had the jigs to build Sierra parts. The Escort RS Cosworth was part Sierra, so that was half the battle won. The design changed a little in 1989 to add some softer design lines in sympathy to the upcoming Ford Mondeo, thanks to help from Ford and later Aston and Jaguar designer Ian Callum. To offset the apathy Ford suspected from the release of the 5th generation Escort, a mock-up of the final design was hurriedly put together over Christmas and was shown alongside the new Escort in early 1990. Unlike the regular car, this hot derivative got a warm reception. Things looked even better when a prototype was entered for its first rally in Talavera, and it won. But 1990 was mainly filled with producing a few test cars to work out all the kinks for the production model. Production began in earnest in early 1992, and soon customers got to see what all the fuss was about. The RS Cosworth was a beast. The 2-litre Cosworth turbocharged engine developed 224 horsepower, but could be tuned to stupidly high levels if you dared. The first 2,500 cars were made to satisfy the FIA's homologation rules. Subsequent cars ditched some of the parts that were unnecessary for the road, and Ford tried to make the car a little easier to live with, such as reducing turbo lag, while it remained just as fast and fun to drive. With the XR3i, the RS2000 and the RS Cosworth, there were now 3 different sports models, but sales of the RS Cosworth failed to live up to expectations. They'd hoped to produce 5,000 cars every year, but only 7,145 cars were ever made. Maybe it was too expensive, into BMW M3 territory, but with the advent of joyriding, prospective customers suddenly found insurance rates for these cars skyrocketing. Steve Saxe's book gives more detail about the Escort RS Cosworth than you could ever need to know, but as he explains here, hot hatches were out of favour and the RS Cosworth was the wrong car for the market in the early 1990s.
The way it tends to work, as it would be today as it was back then, is once you've spent the money on the tooling, it's usually cheaper to just make the damn thing and get your money back, even if you don't sell so many, just because you spent millions on tooling up for production. And so poor old Escort Cosworth, yeah, absolutely born at the wrong time, it's fair to say. And although it's an icon today, it was always a bit of a tough sell. And that was one of the things I was amazed to discover, all the different options that Ford looked at that I didn't know about. And I had to go back and ask the guys that designed the car if there was a potentially an Aston Martin version of it, there was a Speedster considered, there was a coupe considered, rear-wheel drive versions. I mean, they looked at everything to try and sort of build a universe around Escort Cosworth of beyond the core models. So they certainly tried with that car, and from a racing perspective, it was certainly extremely successful. So from the perspective of not necessarily absolute sales, but the brand, yeah, absolutely, it was a hugely successful car.
It was Steve Harper who worked on the Aston Martin version.
I actually did a derivative of it later for Rod Mansfield, who moved to Aston Martin, and we did a proposal for an Escort 6-cylinder engine version of the Escort Cosworth floor pan as a new Aston Martin, and I designed it around the DB Zagato, the original Zagato. And unfortunately, we were in competition against a car called the DB7 by a guy called Ian Callum, based on the XJS, and of course all that technology exists. Rod's was an advanced car that would have been too expensive to produce, so Ian's car won. The DB7 won out.
The Escort RS Cosworth was an amazing achievement and took the top spot of the 1994 and 1996 Monte Carlo rallies, but it failed to succeed in its original goal to lift the World Rally Championship trophy. It gave it a good try, but that accolade would go to the Toyota Celica in both 1993 and 1994. By the time the Mondeo rolled around in the early 1990s, the RS name, while not exactly toxic, wasn't exactly what customers were craving. They liked their cars to be outside their house when they got up in the morning, and badges were just advertisements to how stealable a car really was.
There originally was a Mondeo RS conceived in the plan. And it's a little bit where time comes and goes, I think, in the fortunes of the RS brand. And if you look back to the early 90s, particularly to the UK, which is the strongest market for RS, it's always been probably 70, even 80% of sales. The early 90s were beset with car theft. There were massive amounts of insurance issues and things like that. And so the problem was, by the time that the Mondeo came out, it was born in the time and the era of really uninsurability. And even the XR brand, the second tier sporty brand, if you like, was beginning to lose favor. And so there was really that level of one risk. And the other was Ford tended to try, and I think it's fair to say held true to it most of the time, use RS when it was applied to a car that had proper motorsport aspirations. And early on, they weren't yet, although they did later with ProDrive, compete with the Mondeo in competition in the British Touring Car Championship.
With the Sierra showing a large car wasn't the way to win at motorsports, the Mondeo wouldn't get the coveted RS badge. With Ford investing in Formula One, they began pushing the worldwide Ford racing brand on the new Puma towards the end of the 1990s. But although the RS badge had disappeared from Ford showrooms in the UK, it still had a soft spot in drivers' hearts. Along with the Capri concept, Ford management looked at rekindling a Fiesta RS around 2000, and although a concept would be shown in 2004, nothing came of it. Like with the original Fiesta, Ford couldn't work out how to make a profit from this pint-sized rocket. Ford had a long relationship with Mazda, starting with a partnership in 1974. This led to restyled Mazda 323s appearing as Ford Lasers, Meteors, Lifes, Tierras, Lynxes, Liatas, Aztecs and Activas in South Africa, Australia and the Far East. The fifth generation of the 323 would be turned into an RS model in Taiwan as the 2-litre 140 horsepower Ford Tierra RS with a sporty body kit. Over in the Philippines and Malaysia, the car was known as the Lynx RS, and in South Africa as the Laser RS. As far as I can discover, this wasn't something created for motorsports, with the RS letters used to create a little bit of excitement around Ford's family car range. But what of Ford's new runaway success in Europe in the late 1990s? Would it, like its predecessor, get a free revving RS version?
The story goes back to really where Focus began, which was there was never a plan for a sporty Focus. There was not an S or an XR, an ST or an RS. There was no plan for a sporty Focus when the car was conceived, because it was born on paper back in the era of the joyriding times. Then the Focus came out and it proved itself to be easily the best driving vehicle, probably, and I've put it in my most recent book, the best car in the world. There was nothing wrong with that car. It looked stunningly different. It was incredibly reliable. It drove like nothing else. It had a fresh interior. Customers loved it. There's probably just not been a better car that Ford has ever launched. And for its day, for a mass market car, it was just bulletproof. It really was.
A Focus RS would appear just after the Focus launched, but the 1999 Focus RS WRC wasn't something that could be bought by mere mortals. This was a collaboration with M Sport as a successor to the Escort RS Cosworth and designed exclusively for rallying. The need to create homologation specials was gone, so a handful of special rally cars were made and piloted by Colin McRae and Carlos Sainz, dad of the Formula One driver. It would turn out to be more than up to the task. It racked up a slew of rally victories, but never the World Championship crown. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. With Colin McRae crashing out on the final round and losing by 2 points, it seems Ford was never destined to regain the top step, despite making a competitive car. With hot hatch insurance rates coming down and with the success of the Focus both on and off the track, Ford looked once again at building something sportier for the road. The first product was the 2002 ST170, known as the SVT stateside, but Ford were thinking of something better. Or rather, two teams had the same idea. One was the SVE, or Special Vehicle Engineering Team in Europe, who had produced the ST170 with their SVT colleagues in Detroit. The project they dreamt up was a Subaru Impreza and Mitsubishi Evo killer, a 300 horsepower all-wheel drive beast with a Volvo gearbox, codenamed Project Irene. It was produced with Heavy Hitters ProDrive, who'd recently helped Subaru win the World Rally Championships, and they also teamed up with Cosworth for that powerful engine. ProDrive's electronics kept all that power in check for regular drivers to control, and it seemed none of its contemporaries could touch it. The other Focus RS project was born out of the Focus RS WRC that was contesting rally victories. One of the engineers that had worked with it, Neil Briggs, got chatting with Ford Racing and suggested what a road-going RS version should be: potent but affordable. One surprising point he made was that all-wheel drive wasn't necessary. Light bulbs went off, and when Martin Leach was installed as the new Vice President of Product Development for Ford of Europe, they pitched their vision of a Ford Focus RS. Martin was sympathetic and told them to do some more work, in their own time of course. They duly did and came back with something more fleshed out. Martin provided some financing and the team hired M Sport to build a one-off Focus shell that was built up with a Mountune engine. This was product development on a budget. Tickford got involved to take the car to the next level now that Martin Leach had put the car on Ford's roadmap. When Neil Briggs first pitched his Ford Focus RS vision, he saw it with aftermarket parts that were used in competition, so the car got Oz wheels, Brembo brakes and Sparco seats. The project got the official go from Martin Leach, and the Ford Focus RS was shown off at the 2000 British Motor Show, where it was understandably the star of the show. The hope was to launch it in 2001, but suppliers dragged their feet, working on limited run parts that they saw as a distraction from their main job. Neil Briggs' solution was simple: take them to a track and let them drive the new car to show them just what they could be a part of. It was a trick that other project managers could maybe learn from. The people behind it had a wealth of motorsports knowledge, so when customers and the press got their hands on one in 2002, they found it was naturally a barrel of fun to drive, on the track at least. The 212 horsepower turbocharged 2-litre Ford Zeta engine got the car to 60 in 6.3 seconds. And you couldn't complain about the price. It was the same as the Escort RS Cosworth that had launched 10 years earlier, so it was cheaper in real terms. And despite mainly standard parts in the cockpit, the extras added a sense of drama. But on actual roads, some felt the car was a bit of a handful. But what happened to the other Focus RS, Project Irene? Once the competing RS was shown in 2000, the writing was on the wall, but surprisingly work continued until 2002, by which time this proposition made less and less sense. The press had by then got wind of it and were eagerly expecting Ford to produce it, but the next generation Focus would launch just 2 years later and used Volvo's 5-cylinder engine. Was there a need for Irene's 300 horsepower Cosworth-tuned 4-cylinder engine? Better tyre technology had meant there was less need for all-wheel drive on a road car, and with a mooted price double that of the £20,000 Ford Focus RS that launched, Project Irene was abandoned. It could have been the next level beyond the official Ford RS car, but it had been usurped.
It's a fantastically romantic story, I think, that a bunch of outsiders pitched to Ford's CEO of Europe and said, we're going to create for you a proof of concept car and we'll deliver it to you in 6 months, and you're going to drive it and you're going to love it and you're going to want to make it, and we'll engineer it for you. And that's pretty much what they did. And it's just an amazing untold story that an outside company, which was Tickford, in cahoots with the guys I mentioned, basically engineered the whole car as a discrete separate project from Ford, and then just gave it to them to put in production. It doesn't usually turn out that way in a company like Ford.
The original Focus RS WRC rally car hadn't stood still. A major update in 2003 ultimately disappointed, but the 2006 version proved to be the dog's private bits, taking 8 wins in both 2006 and 2007, winning 2 manufacturers' World Rally Championship crowns in the process. The first time Ford had won since the Escort win in 1979. The Focus was proving that anything the Escort could do, it could do as well, except the Focus won 2 World Championships to the Escort's 1, so no more debate, the Focus was better than the Escort. The second generation Focus launched in 2004. It would take until 2009 for the hotly anticipated RS version to appear, but it had a secret weapon.
The next generation of Focus RS was very much born from the realization that they had the Volvo 5-cylinder engine, and that was an obvious route to power, but it was also a route to differentiation. You can count on the fingers of one hand. A 6-cylinder and certainly 5-cylinder hot hatches are very rare. Also, the 6-cylinder ones, particularly, I'm thinking of some of the Golf VR6 type of vehicles, they don't sell terribly well, but a 5-cylinder is very unusual in the market, and it also has a smoothness and an awful lot of power, and it was within the period that Ford owned Volvo.
That Volvo 5-cylinder engine from the lesser Focus ST, with a tweak or two, would give the new RS the power of the Cosworth-powered Project Irene that never was, 300 horsepower. 0 to 60 was now sub 6 seconds while still being front-wheel drive. Despite the extra power, the power came more smoothly and it handled much better on the road. And for just £25,000, like the RS models of the 1970s, this was fun on a relatively low budget. I mean, that was cheaper than an entry-level BMW 3 Series Coupe that had a 2-litre engine that was positively pedestrian in comparison. The fast times were back, but you had to tell your friends in hushed tones so those pesky joyriders didn't return. It got even better in 2010 when Ford announced the Focus RS 500, harking back to the Sierra RS 500 of the 1980s. It was a limited run of 500 Focus RS cars with an improved 345 horsepower. Rather than the blue, white and lurid green of the second generation Focus RS, the RS 500 was only made in black. The rallying Sierra of the 1980s had given way to the smaller Escort of the 1990s, with each generation of car growing in size and engines producing more power from an ever smaller displacement. It was perhaps inevitable that the rally-winning Focus RS WRC would be usurped by the Fiesta RS WRC in 2011. There wouldn't be a road-going Fiesta RS, but its successor, the Fiesta WRC, with just a 1.6-litre engine, would score its own World Rally Championship win in 2017. With the warm reception of the second-generation Focus RS, it was natural that Ford would look to produce a third-generation version. Since the previous car, Ford's disparate European, American and Australian performance teams had been merged. The upshot of this was that the new RS would sprout wings and be driven by more than just Europeans. And this time the car would get all-wheel drive, the first since the Escort RS Cosworth.
There is a point where tyre technology rushes up and rushes forward, and you don't need four-wheel drive for traction so much. And there was the GKN Twinster technology that went into that third generation RS that gives it that adjustability and the drivability that's completely unlike a conventional two-wheel drive or even four-wheel drive hatch or indeed any car of a previous era. So in that respect, I'll give Ford a lot of credit that they were moving forward with the technology, and it wasn't just about putting more power into the vehicle, it was also about the driving experience. And that's fair to say. We're in a world where cars have got so much power now. You can't just rely on a big engine, more power to make it a particularly appealing vehicle when a modern vehicle's just got so much straight line power out the gate.
It wasn't just that the new all-wheel drive system was more flexible or better with the ability to move torque between each wheel. It was cheaper, and that meant that Ford could offer the Focus for as competitive a price as the previous outings, important when they were up against the Honda Civic Type R and Volkswagen Type R, and it beat both of them on price. Even Father Christmas wanted to drive a Focus RS. Gone was the Volvo's 5-cylinder, now out of the picture as Volvo wasn't a Ford subsidiary. Besides, it was too thirsty, and the Mustang's 320 horsepower 2.3 litre 4-cylinder worked just fine, thank you very much, giving a sub 5-second 0 to 60 time. And don't tell the Americans, but it also beat their beloved Mustang in a sprint, even when the Mustang was fitted with a larger V6. When driven carefully, it could also return a respectable 37 miles per gallon, but maybe not at the advertised top speed of 168 miles an hour. But the new Focus's party piece had to be its drift mode. Find a suitably open space, and with the 6-speed manual gearbox you could be drifting endlessly like you were an expert, but just don't expect to be able to drive home on those tyres. When you could buy a car with this amount of power and this amount of fun for under £30,000, why buy a less practical supercar? Given the stats and the fun of this Focus RS, it wasn't that surprising that anticipation for this new version was at fever pitch when it launched in early 2016. The press went gaga over the car with glowing reviews. But sales of regular passenger Focuses that everyone else bought were slipping. The RS would only remain on sale for 2 years before throwing in the towel. The 4th generation Focus wouldn't get an RS version. Ford blamed it on more stringent emission rules and CO2 taxation, but the reality was the Focus was fighting for its very survival. The last Focus RS drove off the production line in 2018, and the RS name went into hibernation once more. It's fitting that the last RS was arguably the best, although enthusiasts regard the 1st and 2nd generations of the Focus RS highly because of their specialness during their respective eras. Top Gear magazine tellingly wrote, "Its job is to make serious performance accessible, pleasurable and affordable to the man in the street." You could use that to describe every RS model that Ford produced.
You can't dress up terribly well, at least I certainly can't. But badges and wheels are like jewelry, and spoilers, they're the things that differentiate a car, and they're like a team strip for a football team or something like that. It gives people something to hang on and associate to. Ford, like the rest of them, have got to find their way forward. I mean, we've seen it with BMW putting a toe in the water with electrified M cars. So, the future is very much all to play for. But the days of an old Cosworth powered thing, we've obviously left those long ago. The RS brand has been dead many times, if you like, and so I guess reports of its death can be always greatly exaggerated until we know what the future is. And at this point, we'll have to wait and see.
Have we seen the last RS? Well, don't ever write Ford off. For 120 years, they've been mass producing cars that both delight and excite. When the last Focus RS launched, a Ford PR head was quoted as saying, "It allows us to capture a younger audience, and that will be critical to the longevity of the company." Those younger people are now growing up and dreaming of the next Ford RS. It will come, and it will be brilliant. As to the future of the RS, 6 designers have reimagined the 1980s RS200 for the future in Steve's RS Special Collector's Edition book, and this video only scratched the surface of the RS story. Much of the information and photos in this video came from Steve Saxty's excellent award-winning Secret Ford Volume 2, plus the RS Special Collector's Edition. These books aren't just about RS though, but the unheard story of all of European Ford passenger cars from the 1970s to the early 2000s. And as you can tell from my interview with Steve, he really knows his stuff. Steve's very kindly agreed to offer 20% off to Big Car viewers using code BIGCAR20. There's a link above and in the description. If you want to see the whole interview with Steve, there's also a link on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.